Welcome to Scrum Timeboxing and Scrum Event Introduction. Upon completion, you will have a clear definition of Scrum events and timeboxing. You will understand how Scrum events and timeboxing is used in the Scrum framework, and understand how Scrum events and timeboxing can be used to give context and limits to ambitious tasks. Timeboxing is allotting a fixed unit of time for an activity. That unit of time is called time box. The goal of timeboxing is to define and limit the amount of time dedicated to an activity. In Scrum, timeboxing is a critical component of all 5 events. Some Scrum teams also use timeboxing during a sprint to concretely define open-ended tasks. An example of an open-ended task might be conducting research that is necessary for the team to reach a decision or to estimate the size and complexity of an upcoming story. Timeboxing is a common feature of many project management methodologies because timeboxing keeps teams focused on accomplishing the task and by providing a clear definition of done. Timeboxing also encourages teams to start getting work done immediately. Temporal motivation theory shows that time constraints are critical components of getting work done effectively. In Scrum, the sooner you can inspect a deliverable, the sooner you can adapt it. So timeboxing is a critical component of a good Scrum, and that is why all 5 events in Scrum are timeboxed. So first we have a sprint. Timeboxing is used to define the length of the sprint. The sprint is timeboxed to 1 month or less, in which the Scrum team will deliver the sprint goals. Sprint planning. When a team launches, they establish the time box for the sprint planning meeting. As noted in the Scrum guide, a sprint planning meeting should be time-boxed at 8 hours or less for the 1-month sprint. The shorter the sprint, the shorter the time box should be for the sprint planning. Daily Scrum. The daily Scrum is a time box of 15 minutes for each 24-hour period that helps the Scrum team synchronize activities and make visible any impediments to achieve the sprint goal. Sprint Review is a time box of 4 hours or less for 1-month sprint. During the sprint review, sprint backlog items delivered during the sprint are demonstrated and inspected. It is also a time to adapt the backlog based on feedback. Sprint Retrospective. The sprint retrospective is a time box of 3 hours or less for 1-month sprint. This is an event in which the team inspects itself and identifies a process improvement that the team will implement in the following sprint. In Scrum, there is no formal event that covers the product backlog refinement. Instead, the Scrum Guide states that the Scrum team decides how and when the refinement is done, and that refinement usually consumes no more than 10% of the capacity of the developers. Before we go into details, I'm frequently asked who should attend the various Scrum meetings: sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, sprint retrospective, and product backlog refinement or product backlog grooming. Later on, we will cover all this, but I've decided to summarize all answers into this table, and as you can see, we have sprint planning part 1 and part 2. We will cover that later on as well. So use this table whenever you want to refresh your memory.